In a world where royal protocol demands perfection and tradition rules supreme, one young prince dared to be different. Behind the palace walls, and beneath the weight of a crown he would never wear, Prince Harry chose a path that would make him beloved not for his title, but for his humanity. These are the moments when a rebellious prince became the people's favorite royal, touching hearts across the globe with gestures so genuine, so unexpectedly tender, that they reminded us all of what it truly means to serve others. From battlefields to children's hospitals, from grieving families to forgotten communities, Harry's journey reveals how sometimes the greatest acts of royalty have nothing to do with ceremony and everything to do with simply showing up as yourself. This is the story of 5 extraordinary moments that didn't just melt hearts. They change how the world sees what it means to be a prince. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on Camp Bastion in Afghanistan as Second Lieutenant Harry Wales adjusted his body armor one more time. It was December 2007, and while his brother William was safely continuing his royal duties in London, Harry had insisted on doing something that made palace officials lose sleep at night. He was going to war. The decision hadn't come easily for the royal family. For months, heated discussions had taken place behind closed doors at Buckingham Palace. The Queen herself had been consulted, along with the Prime Minister and military officials. The consensus was clear: it was simply too dangerous. Harry was third in line to the throne, and the risk of him being captured or killed by Taliban forces who would see him as the ultimate prize was too great. But Harry had other plans. Since graduating from the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, he had trained alongside his fellow officers, sweated through the same grueling exercises, and earned his place in the Blues and Royals Regiment through merit, not birthright. When his unit received deployment orders to Afghanistan, Harry made it crystal clear that he would not accept special treatment. "I want to go where my boys go," he told senior palace advisors during one particularly tense meeting. "I didn't join the army to sit in an office while my friends risked their lives." The young prince's determination was both admirable and terrifying to those responsible for his safety. Charles, his father, understood the military calling that ran in their family's blood, but the memories of his own military service seemed safer in comparison. Diana would have been proud of her youngest son's courage, though she might have shared the family's concerns about his safety. What made Harry's insistence even more remarkable was what he was willing to give up. He knew that going to Afghanistan would mean a complete media blackout. For 10 weeks, he would essentially disappear from public life. No royal engagements, no charity events, no photo opportunities that could compromise his mission or endanger his fellow soldiers. He was trading his royal identity for the chance to serve his country as an ordinary soldier. The breakthrough came when military officials proposed a deal that seemed almost impossible to pull off. Harry could deploy to Afghanistan, but only under the strictest secrecy. British media outlets agreed to a complete blackout on his deployment in exchange for exclusive access once he returned. It was an unprecedented arrangement that required trust from journalists who were essentially sitting on one of the biggest royal stories in decades. On a cold December morning, Harry boarded a military transport plane at RAF Breise Norton, knowing that he was stepping into the unknown. Unlike his previous public appearances where every move was choreographed and every word carefully considered, this journey would test him in ways that no royal training could prepare him for. The flight to Afghanistan gave Harry time to reflect on the path that had brought him to this moment. Since his mother's death when he was just 12 years old, he had struggled with the constraints of royal life. The constant scrutiny, the endless protocol, and the feeling of living in a fishbowl had driven him to rebel in various ways throughout his teenage years. But the military had given him something he had always craved: a sense of purpose that went beyond ribbon-cutting ceremonies and state dinners. When the plane touched down at Camp Bastion, Harry experienced something he had rarely felt in his life: anonymity. To the soldiers around him, he wasn't Prince Harry of Wales. He was simply Harry Wales, a young officer who had earned his place through training and dedication. The relief of shedding his royal identity, even temporarily, was palpable. His commanding officers had been carefully briefed about their royal charge, but they had also been given strict instructions. Harry was to be treated like any other soldier. No special privileges, no easier assignments, no reduced risk. It was exactly what Harry wanted, though it meant facing dangers that made his security detail back home break out in cold sweats. The first few days at Camp Bastion were a whirlwind of briefings, equipment checks, and acclimatization to the harsh Afghan environment. Harry threw himself into every task with an enthusiasm that impressed his fellow soldiers. He cleaned his own equipment, stood guard duty, and volunteered for additional responsibilities without any hint of entitlement. One evening, as Harry was cleaning his rifle alongside a fellow officer named Jake Morrison, the conversation turned to families back home. Jake mentioned missing his girlfriend's birthday and how she struggled to understand why he felt the need to serve in such a dangerous place. "At least your girl knows you're here by choice," Jake said, not knowing the irony of his words. "My mom keeps asking why I couldn't just get a safe desk job somewhere." Harry smiled, thinking of his own family's concerns. "Sometimes the safe choice isn't the right choice," he replied, his words carrying more weight than Jake could possibly understand. The weeks that followed would test Harry in ways that no amount of royal training could have prepared him for. He learned to navigate the complex dynamics of military life, where respect was earned through actions rather than inherited through bloodlines. He discovered the deep bonds that form between soldiers who depend on each other for survival, relationships built on trust and mutual respect rather than protocol and hierarchy. During a particularly challenging night patrol, Harry found himself crouched in a defensive position alongside Sergeant Mike Andrews, a veteran soldier with multiple tours of duty under his belt. As they maintained watch in the darkness, Andrews spoke quietly about his motivation for serving. "It's not about the glory or the recognition," Andrews said, his voice barely audible. "It's about standing up for something bigger than yourself, about protecting the people who can't protect themselves." Harry nodded in the darkness, understanding that Andrews had just articulated something Harry had been struggling to define for years. This was what service really meant. Not the carefully orchestrated charity visits or ceremonial duties that filled his royal calendar, but the willingness to put yourself at risk for others without expecting anything in return. As the weeks passed, Harry's fellow soldiers began to see glimpses of something special in their young officer. He had a natural ability to connect with people, to make them feel heard and valued regardless of their rank or background. During downtime at the base, Harry would often be found listening to soldiers' stories, remembering details about their families, and checking on their well-being. Private Tom Wilson, a young soldier from Manchester who was struggling with homesickness, later recalled how Harry had noticed his mood during a particularly difficult week. Instead of offering empty platitudes or official encouragement, Harry had simply sat with him and shared his own struggles with being away from family. "He told me that missing home wasn't a sign of weakness," Wilson remembered. "He said it was proof that you had something worth fighting for." The conversation got me through some really dark moments. The turning point came during Harry's 7th week in Afghanistan, when his forward operating base came under attack during a routine patrol. As mortars exploded around their position and small arms fire crackled through the air, Harry found himself in the exact situation that had given his family nightmares for months. But instead of panic or the entitled expectation of special protection, Harry's training kicked in. He coordinated with his team, provided covering fire when needed, and maintained communication with base command throughout the engagement. When the dust settled and the immediate danger had passed, his fellow soldiers looked at their young officer with newfound respect. "That's when we knew he was really one of us," Sergeant Andrews later explained. "Titles don't mean much when bullets are flying. What matters is whether you'll stand with your mates when things get tough." Harry proved himself that day. The incident also marked a crucial moment in Harry's own understanding of his capabilities. For years, he had been defined by what he couldn't do, the restrictions placed on him by his royal status. But in that moment of genuine danger, he had discovered what he could do when given the chance to prove himself on equal terms with others. Word of Harry's conduct under fire began to spread through the military community, though the media blackout meant that the public remained unaware of their prince's courage under pressure. His superiors began to see him not as a royal obligation to be managed, but as a genuine asset to his unit. The final weeks of Harry's deployment were filled with a bittersweet mix of pride and reluctance. He had found something in Afghanistan that he had been searching for his entire life, a role where he was valued for his character rather than his birthright. The thought of returning to the constraints of royal life felt like a step backward rather than a homecoming. On his last night at Camp Bastion, Harry joined his unit for what had become a tradition, a quiet moment of reflection before soldiers departed for home. As they sat in a circle sharing thoughts about their deployment, Harry's words revealed the profound impact of his Afghan experience. "You've taught me what it really means to serve," he told his fellow soldiers. "Not the kind of service where people bow and curtsy, but the real thing. The kind where you put others before yourself and ask for nothing in return." When news of Harry's deployment finally broke after his return to the UK, the public reaction was unlike anything the royal family had experienced before. Here was a prince who had insisted on serving his country in the most dangerous way possible, who had refused special treatment, and who had earned the genuine respect of his fellow soldiers. The boy who had once been seen as the rebellious spare heir had transformed into a young man whose courage and dedication commanded respect across all levels of society. His 10 weeks in Afghanistan had not only proven his personal bravery, but had also redefined what it meant to be a modern royal. The desert sun that had beaten down on Harry during those transformative weeks had forged something new. A prince who understood that true nobility comes not from bloodlines or titles, but from the willingness to stand alongside others in service of something greater than oneself. This understanding would shape every meaningful moment of his life that followed, beginning with his next extraordinary act of courage that would again capture hearts around the world. The sterile corridors of the Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C., echoed with the quiet sounds of recovery and rehabilitation. It was 2013, and Prince Harry walked through these halls with a heavy heart, witnessing firsthand the devastating toll that modern warfare takes on the brave men and women who serve their countries. What he saw during that visit would spark an idea that would eventually become one of his greatest contributions to the world. Harry had returned from his second tour of duty in Afghanistan the previous year, serving as an Apache helicopter pilot. The experience had deepened his connection to the military community and, more importantly, opened his eyes to the challenges faced by wounded veterans. Unlike his first deployment, where he had served as a forward air controller, his second tour had given him a different perspective on the human cost of conflict. During his time as an Apache pilot, Harry had been responsible for providing close air support to ground troops in some of Afghanistan's most dangerous regions. The weight of that responsibility, knowing that soldiers' lives depended on his split-second decisions, had matured him in ways that palace life never could. But it was the injured soldiers he met during his deployment that left the deepest impression on him. At Walter Reed, Harry spent time with American service members who had suffered life-changing injuries in Iraq and Afghanistan. He met soldiers who had lost limbs to improvised explosive devices, veterans struggling with traumatic brain injuries, and young men and women whose invisible wounds from post-traumatic stress disorder were just as debilitating as any physical injury. One encounter in particular would stay with Harry for years to come. Master Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez, a decorated Marine who had lost both legs in an IED explosion in Afghanistan, was learning to walk again with prosthetic limbs. Despite his injuries, Rodriguez maintained an infectious enthusiasm and determination that struck Harry immediately. "The hardest part isn't the physical therapy," Rodriguez explained as he demonstrated his new prosthetics. "It's feeling like you're not the same person you used to be. Like maybe you don't have anything left to offer." Harry listened intently as Rodriguez described the psychological challenges of adapting to life after military service, especially when dealing with serious injuries. The Marine spoke about feeling isolated from civilian society, struggling to find purpose outside of military service, and watching too many of his fellow veterans slip into depression and despair. "We need something to show us that we're still warriors," Rodriguez continued, "that our injuries don't define our limitations." Those words echoed in Harry's mind long after he left Walter Reed. He had witnessed the incredible resilience and determination of wounded veterans, but he had also seen how society often viewed them through the lens of their injuries rather than their capabilities. An idea began to form, inspired by an event he had witnessed during his rehabilitation visits. Several months earlier, Harry had attended the Warrior Games in Colorado Springs, a Paralympic-style competition for wounded, ill, and injured service members and veterans. The event had been established by the U.S. Department of Defense in 2010, and Harry had been amazed by the level of competition and the transformative power of adaptive sports on the participants. He watched as athletes who had lost limbs competed in swimming, cycling, and track events with an intensity and skill that rivaled any Olympic competition. More importantly, he saw how the experience changed them. Veterans who had arrived feeling broken and purposeless left with renewed confidence and a sense of possibility. The idea that would eventually become the Invictus Games began to crystallize during a conversation with Dr. David Kassler, a sports medicine physician who worked with wounded veterans. Dr. Kassler had been researching the therapeutic benefits of competitive sports for individuals with traumatic injuries and had accumulated compelling evidence about its effectiveness. "Physical rehabilitation is just the beginning," Dr. Kassler explained during their meeting. "When we add the element of competition, of striving for excellence, we see transformations that go far beyond physical recovery. These athletes rediscover their warrior spirit." Harry became increasingly convinced that the UK needed its own version of the Warrior Games, but he wanted to take the concept further. His vision was for an international competition that would not only celebrate the achievements of wounded veterans, but also change public perceptions about disability and military service. The challenge was enormous. Creating an international sporting event from scratch required significant funding, government support, logistical expertise, and buy-in from military organizations around the world. Harry knew that his royal status could open doors, but he also understood that the project would succeed or fail based on its merit, not his title. Harry began building a team of experts who shared his vision. He recruited military leaders, sports organizers, medical professionals, and business executives who understood both the potential and the challenges of such an ambitious undertaking. The early meetings were held in informal settings, with Harry often hosting discussions at Kensington Palace while wearing casual clothes and encouraging frank, unfiltered feedback. One of the key early supporters was Sir Keith Mills, who had been instrumental in organizing the London 2012 Olympics. Mills was initially skeptical about the feasibility of Harry's vision, but was won over by the prince's genuine passion and detailed understanding of the issues facing wounded veterans. Harry didn't just want to organize another sporting event, Mills later recalled. He wanted to create something that would fundamentally change how society views wounded veterans and, just as importantly, how veterans view themselves. The planning process revealed Harry's evolution from a sometimes reckless young royal into a focused and strategic leader. He immersed himself in every aspect of the project, from understanding the specific needs of different disability categories to learning about the logistics of international sporting events. His military experience proved invaluable as he worked with armed forces from different countries to establish participation criteria and support systems. One of the most challenging aspects of the planning was securing government support without making the event appear to be a royal vanity project. Harry walked a careful line, leveraging his connections while ensuring that the Invictus Games would be seen as a serious sporting competition rather than a charity exhibition. The breakthrough came when the UK Ministry of Defence agreed to provide substantial support for the inaugural Games, recognizing the potential benefits for British veterans. This endorsement helped Harry secure backing from other governments and international organizations. As the planning intensified, Harry made a decision that surprised many of his advisors. Instead of maintaining a ceremonial distance from the day-to-day operations, he insisted on being involved in every detail. He visited potential venues personally, met with athletes to understand their needs, and even participated in some of the adaptive sports himself to better appreciate the challenges involved. During one training session at the National Sports Center, Harry attempted to play wheelchair rugby alongside several British veterans. The experience was humbling and enlightening. Despite his fitness and athleticism, he struggled to master the wheelchair techniques and strategies that the veteran athletes had spent months perfecting. It gave me a whole new respect for what these athletes accomplish, Harry reflected after the session. The skill level is incredible, but more than that, the determination to excel despite everything they've been through is truly inspiring. The name Invictus came from the famous poem by William Ernest Henley, which includes the lines, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." The poem had special significance in military circles, representing the unconquerable spirit that Harry had witnessed in wounded veterans throughout his journey. As the inaugural games approached, set for September 2014 in London, Harry faced intense scrutiny from media and critics who questioned whether the event would live up to its ambitious goals. Some dismissed it as an expensive publicity stunt, while others worried that it would exploit wounded veterans for feel-good media coverage. Harry addressed these concerns directly in interviews and public appearances leading up to the games. His message was consistent and passionate. This was about celebrating capability, not disability, and about showing the world the incredible resilience of military veterans. These games will show that being wounded in military service doesn't mean your service is over, Harry stated during a pre-games press conference. It means you have the opportunity to serve as an inspiration to others and to represent your country in a different, but equally important way. The weeks leading up to the games were filled with logistical challenges that would have overwhelmed a less determined organizer. Harry found himself troubleshooting everything from transportation arrangements for athletes with mobility issues to ensuring that the competition venues met international Paralympic standards. One particularly moving moment came during the final preparations when Harry met with the families of participating athletes. Sarah Mitchell, whose husband James had lost an arm in Afghanistan and would be competing in swimming events, described the transformation she had witnessed in her husband since he began training for Invictus. 6 months ago, James barely left the house, she told Harry. He felt like his military career, which had been his entire identity, was over. Now he's training harder than he ever did as an active soldier, and he has this sense of purpose again. You've given him back his future. These personal stories reinforced Harry's conviction that the Invictus Games represented something far more significant than a sporting event. They were about restoration of purpose, rebuilding of identity, and recognition of ongoing service in a different form. The opening ceremony of the inaugural Invictus Games at the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in London exceeded everyone's expectations. As Harry watched 400 competitors from 13 nations parade into the stadium, many in wheelchairs, some with prosthetic limbs, others dealing with invisible injuries, he felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with royal privilege and everything to do with human achievement. The ceremony itself struck the perfect balance between celebrating military service and showcasing the competitive spirit of the athletes. When the final torchbearer, a British Army veteran who had been blinded by an improvised explosive device in Afghanistan, lit the Invictus flame, there wasn't a dry eye in the stadium. Over the 4 days of competition that followed, the world witnessed something extraordinary. Athletes who had been told they might never walk again competed in track events. Veterans who had struggled with depression and isolation found new purpose in representing their countries. Family members who had watched their loved ones struggle through difficult recoveries saw them excel in ways they had never imagined possible. The media coverage exceeded all expectations, but, more importantly, it focused on athletic achievement rather than pity or inspiration. The competitors were portrayed as elite athletes who happened to be military veterans, not as wounded warriors to be pitied. One of the most memorable moments came during the swimming competition when Australian veteran Mark Thompson, competing with one arm, broke a world record in the 50-meter freestyle. As Thompson touched the wall and realized what he had accomplished, his emotional celebration became an iconic image of the Games. "I've never felt stronger in my life," Thompson said afterward. "Not before my injury, not during my military service. Right here, right now, representing my country again, this is the strongest I've ever been." Harry's vision had become reality in a way that exceeded his most optimistic expectations. The Invictus Games had not only provided a platform for wounded veterans to compete at the highest level, but had also fundamentally changed how society viewed military injuries and recovery. As the closing ceremony concluded with plans already announced for the next Games in Orlando, Harry reflected on what had been accomplished. The boy who had once struggled to find his place in the world had created something that would outlast any royal title or ceremonial duty. The success of the Invictus Games had demonstrated Harry's ability to translate his personal experiences and observations into meaningful action that improved the lives of others. The wounded veterans he had met during his military service now had a platform to show the world their incredible capabilities, and society had been reminded that service doesn't end with injury. It simply takes different forms. The prince who had insisted on serving alongside his fellow soldiers in Afghanistan had now created a way for those soldiers to continue serving as examples of human resilience and determination. In doing so, Harry had not only honored their sacrifice, but had also discovered his own unique way of making a lasting difference in the world. The phone call came on a rainy Thursday morning in March 2017, just as Prince Harry was finishing his breakfast at Nottingham Cottage. His private secretary's voice carried an unusual urgency as she described a situation that would test Harry's ability to connect with people during their darkest moments. "Sir, there's been an incident in London," she began carefully. "A terrorist attack on Westminster Bridge and at Parliament. Multiple casualties. The palace is coordinating the official response, but there's something else. A school group from a primary school in Manchester was caught up in the aftermath. The children witnessed some terrible things." Harry set down his coffee cup, his military training automatically shifting him into crisis mode. As the details emerged, the full scope of the tragedy became clear. While the immediate focus was rightly on the victims and their families, there was also concern about the dozens of children who had been visiting London on a school trip when the attack occurred. Greenfield Primary School for Manchester had brought 45 children, aged 8 to 11, to London for what was supposed to be an educational visit to Parliament and the surrounding historic sites. Instead, they had found themselves in the midst of a terrorist attack, witnessing scenes that would haunt them for years to come. The children had been evacuated to a nearby community center, where they waited for hours while authorities secured the area and arranged for their safe transport back to Manchester. Many were traumatized, crying for their parents, and struggling to understand what they had witnessed. Local officials had reached out to Kensington Palace, not for a formal royal visit, but hoping that perhaps someone from the royal family might be able to provide some comfort to the children before they returned home. It was exactly the kind of situation that Harry's handlers would normally decline. Too sensitive, too emotionally charged, too unpredictable. But Harry had already made up his mind before his secretary finished explaining the request. "I'll go now," he said, already standing up. "Have the car ready in 15 minutes. The drive to the community center gave Harry time to think about what he might say to children who had just experienced something that would challenge most adults. He thought back to his own childhood trauma, losing his mother when he was just 12 years old, and how different adults had tried to comfort him with varying degrees of success. He remembered the well-meaning platitudes that felt hollow, the adults who spoke to him like he was fragile and might break at any moment, and the few who had treated him like a person capable of handling difficult truths when they were presented with kindness and honesty. When Harry arrived at the community center, he was met by Mrs. Elizabeth Harper, the head teacher who had led the school trip. Her face showed the strain of trying to keep 45 frightened children calm while dealing with her own shock and fear. "Your Royal Highness, thank you for coming," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I honestly don't know what to say to them. How do you explain something like this to children?" Harry looked through the window into the main room where the children were gathered. Some were sitting quietly, staring at nothing. Others were clinging to their teachers. A few were crying softly. They looked so small and vulnerable, wearing their matching school sweatshirts and carrying the backpacks they had packed excitedly for their London adventure. "You don't explain it," Harry said quietly. "You just let them know they're safe now, and that what happened wasn't their fault. What happened next would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives." Instead of entering the room with the formal bearing expected of a royal visit, Harry simply walked in and sat down on the floor in the middle of the children. "Hi, everyone," he said in a gentle voice. "I'm Harry. I heard you guys had a really scary day, and I wanted to come and see how you're doing." The children looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Some recognized him as a prince, but in that moment, sitting cross-legged on the floor in his jeans and sweater, he looked more like a friendly older brother than a member of the royal family. 8-year-old Emma Wilson was the first to speak. "Are you really a prince?" she asked in a small voice. "I am," Harry replied with a smile. "But today I'm just Harry, and I wanted to see if you guys are okay. I know you saw some pretty scary things today." What followed was an extraordinary hour of connection that none of the adults in the room could have scripted or planned. Harry didn't try to minimize what the children had experienced or distract them with false cheer. Instead, he acknowledged their fear and confusion while helping them process what they had witnessed. When 10-year-old Jake Morrison asked why someone would want to hurt people, Harry's response was honest, but age-appropriate. "Sometimes there are people in the world who are very angry and confused, and they make really bad choices," he explained. "But for every person who makes bad choices, there are thousands and thousands of people who make good choices every day." He told them about the police officers and emergency workers who had run toward danger to help others, about the ordinary people who had opened their doors to strangers seeking shelter, and about how their own teachers had protected them throughout the frightening experience. As the conversation continued, Harry began to share some of his own experiences in a way that the children could understand. He told them about times when he had been scared, including during his military service, and how he had learned that feeling afraid didn't make someone weak, it made them human. "I've been really scared before, too," he admitted when 9-year-old Sophie asked if princes ever got frightened. "When I was in the army, there were times when I was so scared my hands were shaking. But you know what I learned? Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. Being brave means you keep going even when you are scared." The children began to open up, sharing their own fears and asking questions that revealed their struggle to make sense of what they had experienced. Harry listened to each child with complete attention, never rushing or dismissing their concerns. When 11-year-old Marcus asked if something like this could happen again, Harry's answer was both honest and reassuring. "I can't promise that bad things will never happen again," he said. "But I can promise that there are lots and lots of people working every day to keep you safe. And I can promise that what happened today doesn't change how special and wonderful you are." Perhaps the most moving moment came when 7-year-old Lucy, the youngest member of the group, climbed onto Harry's lap without invitation. She had been largely silent since the attack, and her teachers were deeply concerned about her lack of response to their attempts at comfort. As she settled against Harry's chest, she whispered something that only he could hear. Later, Mrs. Harper would learn that Lucy had asked Harry if her mummy would still love her even though she had been scared and cried. Harry's response, delivered in a whisper that somehow seemed to reach every child in the room, was simple and profound. "Your mummy loves you more than anything in the whole world, and she's going to be so proud of how brave you were today. Being scared when scary things happen doesn't make you any less lovable. It makes you human." As the afternoon progressed, Harry found ways to help the children reconnect with feelings of safety and normalcy. He asked them about their school, their favorite subjects, and their hobbies. He listened with genuine interest as they told him about their pets, their families, and their dreams for the future. When 10-year-old Oliver mentioned that he wanted to be a soldier like Harry had been, the prince's response revealed his deep understanding of how to inspire children without overwhelming them with adult responsibilities. "That's amazing," Harry said. "But you know what? You're already being a soldier in your own way. Soldiers protect people and take care of their teammates. Look around this room. You've all been taking care of each other today. That's exactly what good soldiers do." The transformation in the children was visible to everyone in the room. When Harry had arrived, they were a group of traumatized, frightened kids struggling to process an incomprehensible experience. By the time he prepared to leave, they were laughing, asking questions, and showing signs of their natural resilience beginning to reassert itself. Mrs. Harper later described the experience as witnessing something almost magical. "Prince Harry didn't just comfort those children," she said. "He somehow reminded them of who they were underneath all that fear and confusion. He helped them remember that they were still the same wonderful kids they had been that morning, before everything changed." Before leaving, Harry made sure to speak individually with each child, often kneeling down to their eye level and giving them his complete attention. He asked their names, remembered details they had shared, and offered each one a personal word of encouragement. To Emma, who had been worried about having nightmares, he said, "If you have scary dreams, remember that you're safe now. And remember that you're much braver than any bad dream." To Jake, who had been angry about what had happened, he said, "It's okay to feel angry about unfair things. That anger shows that you know right from wrong, which makes you a good person." To Sophie, who had been worried about her younger sister at home, he said, "Your sister is lucky to have a big sister who cares so much about her. You can help her understand that the world is still a good place because it has people like you in it." As Harry prepared to leave, he made one final gesture that would be remembered long after the media moved on to other stories. He asked Mrs. Harper for the school's address and promised to write to each child individually. It wasn't a casual promise made in the emotion of the moment. It was a commitment he would keep. Over the following weeks, each of the 45 children received a handwritten letter from Harry, personally addressed and referring to their specific conversation from that day. The letters weren't formal royal correspondence, but personal notes from someone who remembered their individual concerns and wanted to check on their well-being. The letters contained age-appropriate advice about dealing with difficult feelings, reminders of their own strength and bravery, and encouragement to talk to trusted adults when they felt scared or confused. More importantly, they served as tangible proof that someone important cared about them as individuals, not just as victims of a tragic event. The impact of Harry's visit extended far beyond that single afternoon. In the months that followed, mental health professionals working with the children noted that they seemed to recover from their trauma more quickly and completely than might have been expected. The children frequently referenced their conversation with Harry, using his words to help process their experiences. Mrs. Harper incorporated Harry's approach into her own work with the children, emphasizing their bravery and resilience rather than their victimization. The school's counseling team noted that the children seemed to have retained a sense of their own agency and strength, rather than feeling powerless in the wake of their traumatic experience. The story of Harry's visit eventually made its way into the media, but by then, it was clear that this hadn't been a publicity stunt or a photo opportunity. No cameras had captured the moment. No official statements had been released. The story emerged organically through the grateful testimonies of teachers and parents who had witnessed something extraordinary. What made the incident particularly remarkable was how it demonstrated Harry's evolution as a public figure. The young man who had once been known primarily for his party lifestyle and occasional missteps had become someone who could provide genuine comfort and guidance to children in crisis. His military experience had taught him how to remain calm under pressure and how to provide leadership during difficult situations. His own experience with trauma had given him insight into the healing process and the importance of acknowledging pain rather than dismissing it. But most importantly, his natural empathy and refusal to hide behind royal protocol had allowed him to connect with the children on their level. The afternoon at the community center became a defining moment in Harry's public life, though not because of any grand gesture or formal ceremony. Instead, it was remarkable for its intimacy and authenticity, for the way a prince had simply shown up as a human being when human beings were needed most. In the years that followed, whenever discussions arose about Harry's contributions to public life, those who had been present that day would point to those hours on the floor of a community center as evidence of something special. Here was a member of the royal family who understood that sometimes the most important royal duty was simply to sit with children and remind them that they were not alone. The children from Greenfield Primary School grew up carrying with them not just the memory of a terrible day, but also the memory of how someone had helped them find their way back to safety and hope. In helping them remember who they were beneath their fear, Harry had demonstrated the kind of leadership that no amount of royal training could teach. The leadership that comes from genuine compassion and the courage to be vulnerable alongside those who are suffering. The first time Prince Harry saw Meghan Markle, she wasn't on a red carpet or at a royal event. She was on his friend's Instagram feed, laughing at something off camera, looking completely natural and unguarded. It was July 2016, and Harry was scrolling through social media during a quiet evening at Nottingham Cottage when that single image stopped him mid-scroll. What happened next would change not only Harry's life, but the trajectory of the British monarchy itself. The story of how a prince fell in love with an American actress might sound like a fairy tale, but the reality was far more complex, challenging, and ultimately transformative than any storybook romance. Harry's journey to finding love had been anything but straightforward. Years of high-profile relationships had ended under the intense scrutiny of the British media, and by his early 30s, he had begun to wonder if he would ever find someone who could love him for who he was rather than what he represented. The weight of his royal status had made genuine relationships nearly impossible. Every woman he dated became instant tabloid fodder, their past scrutinized, their families investigated, their every public appearance analyzed for signs of impending engagement. Many promising relationships had crumbled under this pressure, leaving Harry increasingly isolated and cynical about his chances of finding lasting love. But there was something different about the woman in that Instagram photo. Meghan Markle was an accomplished actress with her own successful career, financial independence, and a life that didn't revolve around royal connections or British high society. She was American, biracial, divorced, and older than Harry, all factors that would traditionally make her an unlikely candidate for a royal romance. Their mutual friend, Violet von Wessenholz, had been watching both Harry and Meghan navigate their respective romantic challenges and had an instinct that they might be perfect for each other. When she suggested a blind date, both were initially hesitant for different reasons. Harry was tired of the circus that surrounded his dating life and worried about subjecting another woman to the intense scrutiny that came with being linked to him. Meghan, meanwhile, knew very little about the British royal family and was focused on her acting career and humanitarian work. "I didn't know much about him," Meghan would later admit. "I was more concerned about whether he was a good man than whether he was a prince." Their first meeting took place at Soho House in London in July 2016, carefully arranged to avoid media attention. Harry arrived nervous but determined to be himself rather than playing the role of charming prince. Meghan arrived curious but without expectations, treating it as she would any other blind date. What struck both of them immediately was how easy the conversation felt. They talked for hours, discovering shared passions for humanitarian work, travel, and making a difference in the world. Harry found himself speaking more openly than he had in years, while Meghan was charmed by his self-deprecating humor and genuine interest in her work. The chemistry was undeniable, but both recognized the enormous challenges they would face if they pursued a relationship. Harry's previous experiences had taught him how quickly media attention could destroy something precious, while Meghan understood that dating a British prince would change everything about her carefully built independent life. Their second date took place the very next evening, this time at Harry's cottage in Kensington Palace. Away from even the minimal public exposure of a private club, They could relax completely and explore their growing connection without any pretense or performance. Harry cooked dinner, a simple pasta dish that he admitted was one of the few things he could make well. Meghan was touched by the gesture and the obvious effort he had made to create a normal, intimate evening. They talked until the early hours of the morning, sharing stories about their childhoods, their struggles, and their dreams for the future. What made their connection so powerful was how they challenged each other intellectually and emotionally. Meghan's perspective as an American, as a biracial woman, and as someone completely outside the British establishment opened Harry's eyes to experiences and viewpoints he had never fully considered. Her work as a UN women advocate and her activism around gender equality inspired him to think more deeply about his own platform and how he could use it for positive change. Similarly, Harry's experiences as a military veteran and his work with wounded soldiers introduced Meghan to causes she had never fully explored. His vulnerability about his own mental health struggles and the impact of losing his mother at such a young age created a deep emotional bond between them. As their relationship developed over the summer of 2016, they both knew they were falling in love in a way that felt different from anything either had experienced before. But they also understood that taking their relationship public would unleash forces beyond their control. Harry had learned from his previous relationships that media attention could be overwhelming and destructive. He had watched as former girlfriends were subjected to invasive coverage, false stories, and intense scrutiny that ultimately drove them away. With Meghan, he felt he had found something worth protecting at all costs. They developed elaborate strategies to spend time together while avoiding detection. Meghan would visit London under the pretense of work meetings or friend visits, while Harry would use official trips to create opportunities to see her. They communicated constantly when apart, building an emotional intimacy that sustained them through the challenges of a long-distance relationship conducted under extreme secrecy. The turning point came in October 2016 when Meghan joined Harry for a trip to Botswana. The country held special significance for Harry. He had first visited with his father shortly after his mother's death, and it had become a place where he could escape the pressures of royal life and reconnect with himself. Sharing Botswana with Meghan felt like introducing her to the most authentic part of himself. Away from palaces and protocol, camping under the African stars, Harry could be completely himself. Meghan fell in love not only with the country but with the man she saw there, passionate about conservation, comfortable in the wilderness, and completely at peace. "Botswana is where I feel most like myself," Harry told Meghan one evening as they sat around their campfire. "If you can love me here, then maybe you can love me anywhere." Meghan's response would become legendary between them. "I think I already do love you everywhere." It was during this trip that they both knew their relationship had crossed into something permanent and profound. They began talking seriously about their future together, acknowledging both the incredible possibilities and the enormous challenges they would face. The media attention they had managed to avoid finally caught up with them in October 2016 when a British tabloid broke the story of their relationship. The coverage was immediate and intense, with photographers camping outside Meghan's Toronto home and investigators digging into every aspect of her background. What happened next revealed Harry's fierce protectiveness and his willingness to break with royal protocol when necessary. When media coverage turned racist and sexist, with headlines that were both personally offensive and deeply troubling, Harry made an unprecedented decision. In November 2016, Kensington Palace issued a statement that was unlike anything the royal family had ever released. Instead of the usual diplomatic language, Harry's statement was direct, personal, and emotional. He confirmed his relationship with Meghan and directly called out the racial undertones and sexism in the media coverage. The statement was remarkable not only for its content, but for what it revealed about Harry's willingness to fight for the woman he loved. Royal protocol typically dictated that personal relationships remain private until an engagement was announced, but Harry chose to publicly defend Meghan when she was being unfairly attacked. Prince Harry is worried about Ms. Markle's safety and is deeply disappointed that he has not been able to protect her, the statement read. It is not right that a few months into a relationship with him that Ms. Markle should be subjected to such a storm. The statement sent shockwaves through both the media establishment and royal circles. Some praised Harry for taking a stand against racist and sexist coverage, while others criticized him for breaking with tradition and bringing unwanted attention to the monarchy. For Meghan, Harry's public defense was both touching and eye-opening. She had never expected someone to risk their position and reputation to protect her, and she began to understand the unique pressures Harry faced as a member of the royal family. The media attention also forced them to accelerate their timeline. What might have been a gradual introduction of Meghan to royal life became an immediate immersion in the intense scrutiny and protocol that defined Harry's existence. Their first official public appearance together came in September 2017 at the Invictus Games in Toronto. The image of them holding hands in the VIP box, looking relaxed and happy despite the dozens of cameras focused on them, became iconic. Here was a prince who was willing to claim his happiness publicly, regardless of the controversy it might create. What made their relationship particularly compelling to the public was how it seemed to change Harry himself. Those close to him noted that he appeared more settled, more focused, and more confident than they had seen him in years. Meghan's influence was evident in his increasing engagement with causes related to gender equality and racial justice. Meanwhile, Meghan was learning to navigate the complex world of royal protocol while maintaining her own identity and values. The balancing act was challenging, requiring her to adapt to traditions and expectations that were completely foreign to her American Hollywood background. When Harry proposed in November 2017, the moment was as unconventional as their entire relationship had been. He had designed the ring himself, using diamonds from his mother's collection combined with a stone from Botswana, symbolizing how his past, present, and future had come together in Meghan. The proposal took place during a quiet evening at Nottingham Cottage, while they were cooking dinner together, a moment of complete normalcy in the midst of their extraordinary circumstances. Harry later described it as the most natural thing in the world, despite the months of careful planning that had preceded it. Their engagement interview revealed the depth of their connection and their shared commitment to using their platform for positive change. When asked about the challenges they would face, Meghan's response demonstrated her understanding of what she was taking on. "I think we're a team, and we have a lot of work to do together." The announcement of their engagement was met with worldwide celebration, but it also marked the beginning of even more intense scrutiny. Every aspect of their wedding planning became international news, from the guest list to the flowers to the music selection. What emerged through the planning process was their determination to create a ceremony that honored royal tradition while also reflecting their own values and backgrounds. The decision to include a gospel choir, to have Meghan walk herself down part of the aisle, and to invite members of the public to the grounds of Windsor Castle all reflected their desire to make the monarchy more inclusive and representative. The wedding itself, on May 19th, 2018, became a global celebration of love triumphing over obstacles. The sight of Meghan walking down the aisle of St. George's Chapel, with Harry waiting for her with tears in his eyes, captured hearts around the world. But perhaps the most telling moment came during the ceremony itself, when Harry whispered to Meghan as she reached the altar, "You look amazing. I'm so lucky." In that moment, with the world watching, he was simply a man overwhelmed by love for the woman he was about to marry. The ceremony itself was a perfect blend of tradition and innovation. Bishop Michael Curry's passionate sermon about the power of love, the gospel choir's rendition of "Stand By Me," and the diverse congregation all reflected the couple's vision of a more inclusive future for the monarchy. The images from their wedding day, Harry lifting Meghan's veil with infinite tenderness, their joyful exit from the chapel, their first public kiss as a married couple, became some of the most shared and celebrated photographs in royal history. But beyond the pageantry and global attention, what made their love story so compelling was its authenticity. Here was a prince who had found someone who loved him for who he was, not what he represented, and who was willing to challenge traditions and expectations to build a life together. Their love story represented more than just a royal romance. It symbolized the possibility of change within one of the world's oldest institutions, the power of love to overcome prejudice and tradition, and the courage required to choose happiness over expectation. In finding Meghan, Harry had not only found his life partner, but had also discovered a new sense of purpose and direction. Together, they would go on to challenge conventions, advocate for causes they believed in, and ultimately make the difficult decision to step back from royal duties to protect their family and their values. Their love story became proof that even princes are, at heart, simply human beings looking for someone to love them completely and unconditionally. In Meghan, Harry found not just a wife, but a partner who would help him become the man he was meant to be, free from the constraints of expectation and tradition that had defined his life for so long. The morning of January 8th, 2020, dawned cold and gray over Sandringham House, where the Queen's Norfolk estate sat quietly in the winter landscape. Inside the Georgian mansion, an unprecedented conversation was about to take place that would reshape the British monarchy and define Prince Harry's greatest act of courage. Harry had requested this meeting with his grandmother, father, and brother after months of growing tension and increasingly difficult decisions about his and Meghan's future within the royal family. The weight of what he was about to propose sat heavily on his shoulders as he walked through the familiar corridors where he had spent countless childhood holidays. The past 2 years as a married royal couple had been a whirlwind of incredible highs and devastating lows. The birth of their son Archie in May 2019 had brought immense joy, but it had also intensified Harry's protective instincts and his concerns about the environment his family was growing up in. The media scrutiny that had surrounded Meghan since their relationship became public had only intensified after their marriage. Stories that Harry knew to be false or misleading appeared regularly, often with racial undertones that reminded him uncomfortably of the treatment his mother had received from the same publications decades earlier. What made the situation particularly painful was how isolated Harry felt within his own family. He had hoped that his relatives would rally around Meghan as they had around other newcomers to the royal family. But instead he sensed a distance and sometimes outright hostility that left him feeling protective and increasingly alienated. The turning point had come during their tour of Southern Africa in September 2019. What should have been a triumphant showcase of their work, and their growing family had instead become a platform for Meghan to reveal the toll that constant criticism was taking on her mental health. In a documentary filmed during the tour, Meghan had spoken with heartbreaking honesty about her struggles. "Not many people have asked if I'm okay," she said, her voice breaking. "It's a very real thing to be going through behind the scenes." Harry watched the woman he loved struggle with depression and anxiety that he recognized all too well from his own battles with mental health. The parallels to his mother's experience were impossible to ignore, and Harry began to fear that history was repeating itself in the most tragic way possible. The decision to step back from royal duties had not come easily or suddenly. For months, Harry had tried to find ways to make their situation work within the existing system. He had requested meetings with senior palace officials to discuss greater protection for Meghan and more flexibility in their royal roles. He had hoped that their obvious dedication to their charitable work and their popularity with younger, more diverse audiences would create space for a new kind of royal role. But every attempt at compromise seemed to hit institutional roadblocks. The palace machinery, designed to preserve tradition and minimize risk, seemed incapable of adapting to the unique challenges that Harry and Meghan faced as a modern, mixed-race couple operating in the social media age. The breaking point came when Harry realized that staying within the system was not only failing to protect his family, but was actively harming them. Meghan's mental health continued to deteriorate despite their best efforts, and Harry found himself reliving the helplessness he had felt as a child watching his mother struggle with similar pressures. The conversation at Sandringham was perhaps the most difficult of Harry's life. Across the table sat the three people who had shaped him most profoundly: his grandmother, whose duty and service he had always admired; his father, with whom he had rebuilt a relationship after years of distance; and his brother, his closest friend and ally throughout childhood. Harry began by expressing his deep love and respect for his family and his gratitude for the opportunities his royal birth had provided. But then he spoke with painful honesty about the impossible situation he found himself in, torn between his duty to the crown and his duty to his wife and child. "I can't watch the same thing happen to Meghan that happened to my mother," Harry said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. "I won't be the person who stands by and does nothing while the woman I love suffers." The Queen, who had navigated decades of royal crises with wisdom and grace, listened carefully to her grandson's explanation. She understood better than anyone the weight of duty and the sacrifices required by royal life. But she also recognized the genuine anguish in Harry's voice. Charles, caught between his roles as father and future king, struggled with his own emotions. He had watched his youngest son grow into a man of integrity and compassion, and he could see the pain that Harry was experiencing. Yet he also understood the implications of what Harry was proposing for the institution they both served. William's response was perhaps the most complicated. As Harry's older brother and closest confidant for most of their lives, he felt a deep protective instinct toward Harry. But as second in line to the throne, he also understood the duty and sacrifice that royal life required in ways that went beyond personal preference. The conversation lasted for hours, with each family member trying to find a solution that would keep Harry and his family within the fold while addressing their concerns. Various compromises were proposed: reduced duties, greater privacy, alternative funding arrangements, different roles within the Commonwealth. But Harry had already explored all these possibilities in his own mind and found them insufficient. The fundamental problem wasn't the specific arrangements, but the system itself, which seemed incapable of protecting his family while allowing them to live with authenticity and purpose. "I need to be able to provide for my family independently," Harry explained. "I need to be able to speak truthfully about issues that matter to us. And I need to know that Meghan and Archie can live without constantly looking over their shoulders." The Queen's response revealed both her wisdom and her love for her grandson. While she couldn't hide her disappointment at losing Harry from the family firm, she recognized that his decision came from a place of love and desperation rather than selfishness or rebellion. "Harry," she said quietly, "you will always be my grandson, and this will always be your family. If you truly believe this is the only way to protect Meghan and Archie, then we must respect that decision." The announcement of Harry and Meghan's decision to step back from royal duties sent shockwaves around the world. Reactions ranged from admiration for their courage to criticism of their abandonment of duty. But for Harry, the public response was secondary to the relief he felt at finally being able to prioritize his family's well-being. The transition period was complex and emotionally challenging. Giving up his military titles and patronages meant walking away from roles that had given his life meaning and purpose. The decision to move to North America meant physical distance from family members who had been central to his identity. But as Harry and Meghan settled into their new life in California, the wisdom of their decision became increasingly apparent. Away from the daily scrutiny and institutional constraints, they were able to build the kind of family life that Harry had dreamed of but never thought possible. Watching Meghan's recovery from the depression that had threatened to overwhelm her, Harry felt a profound sense of relief and validation. His wife was laughing again, engaging with their son with joy rather than anxiety, and rediscovering the confidence and passion that had first attracted him to her. Their new life also allowed them to pursue their humanitarian work with greater freedom and authenticity. Without the constraints of royal protocol, they could speak more directly about issues like racial justice, mental health, and climate change. The Archwell Foundation, their nonprofit organization, gave them a platform to create meaningful change without navigating the complex politics of royal patronage. Perhaps most importantly, Harry was able to be the kind of father he had always wanted to be. Growing up without his mother and with a father often distant due to royal duties, Harry was determined to be present and engaged in Archie's daily life. The decision to step back from royal duties made this possible in a way that traditional royal life would not have allowed. The birth of their daughter Lilibet in June 2021 further reinforced the correctness of their choice. Named after both the Queen and Diana, Lilibet represented the bridge between Harry's past and his future, honoring his family while growing up free from the constraints that had defined his own childhood. Critics continued to argue that Harry had abandoned his duty and betrayed the institution that had given him everything. But Harry's response revealed his evolved understanding of what service truly meant. Service is universal. It doesn't have to be through an institution. It can be anywhere, anytime that you're able to help others. Their subsequent projects prove this point. Their Netflix documentaries, Spotify podcasts, and various charitable initiatives demonstrated that stepping away from royal duties hadn't diminished their commitment to making a difference. It had simply changed the platform from which they operated. The interview with Oprah Winfrey in March 2021 provided Harry with an opportunity to explain his decision in his own words. While the interview was controversial and created additional tensions within the royal family, it also revealed the depth of Harry's love for his family and his commitment to